Not very long ago, last night in fact, in a cinema not very far away, I sat for 2.5 hours with a mix of boredom, slight cringe and mild disappointment. I say mild disappointment because I didn't have high expectations of The Last Jedi to begin with. I think The Force Awakens and Rogue One had done a good job of managing my expectations down. Now, I should say I'm not one of those hardcore Star Wars fanboys who feels cheated out of the sequel that he wrongly believes he deserves. I made peace with the rebooted franchise a couple of years ago after watching The Force Awakens. For me, The Force Awakens was entertaining but also derivative and disappointing. I mean, another Death Star? Really? Kylo Ren initially appears genuinely frightening and imposing like Darth Vader was, but then 10 minutes later we find out he's actually more akin to a tantrum-prone SJW. I had no problem with the strong female lead in Rey, but it was a bit much that 5 minutes after learning about the Force, she was able to win a sword fight with a guy who'd been in training since he was a child. And of course I was disappointed by the death of Han Solo, but my moment of peace came when I walked out of the cinema after the movie and saw all the Star Wars paraphernalia on display for purchase, and I realised that this film is not for me. It's for a new generation of kids to get excited about and annoy their parents into buying them all the Star Wars accessories their little hearts desire. So with that preamble out of the way, I'm going to give you my fast and dirty version of the story and some additional thoughts. Star Wars The Last Jedi began to annoy me with the opening screen crawl, not because I don't enjoy those, but because it includes the word Snoke. Probably the worst name for a villain in movie history. I mean, if this was another awful movie about wizards in magic school, then sure, Snoke makes all the sense in the world. But what happened to the Darths? You know, Vader, Maul, and Sidious. Anyway, this movie basically picks up where the last one left off. The Resistance is evacuating their base, and Rey is having a chat with grumpy old Luke on an island somewhere. Of course, hothead Poe Dameron has an idea of his own. He's going to blow up one of the new First Order ships, and you'll be pleasantly surprised to learn it's not called a Death Star. This one has the original name of Dreadnought. Anyway, Poe lays the groundwork by blowing up all the defensive cannons on the Dreadnought so that the Resistance bombers can move in. Now, these are the stupidest designed ships in the entire galaxy. I mean, they would have been perfect in World War II for bombing Dresden, but when you're flying directly at the enemy with a top speed of about 10 miles an hour in a straight line, it makes you an easy target. So whilst they do manage to take out the Dreadnought, thanks to the last-minute stunning and brave efforts of some anonymous Asian heroine because diversity, they lose all their bombers. And Poe is suitably chastised and demoted for spearheading this action by the strange reappearance of Jabba the Hutt. I mean, Princess Leia. Sometimes the years can be cruel, can't they? Now, the problem for the Resistance is that the good old jump to light speed getaway doesn't work this time. You see, the First Order has developed a tracking device that can track ships at light speed. Now, did you notice anything familiar there? Dreadnought ship can track enemy vessels at light speed. Did director Rian Johnson watch Star Trek Into Darkness while writing this? Thus, moments after the Resistance make the jump to light speed, the New Order appear right behind them. So this sets up a key plot point. The Resistance can't get away, but they can manage to stay just out of firing range of the First Order ships, but they only have a limited supply of fuel, so it's countdown to their inevitable doom. Meanwhile, Rey is trying to convince Luke to teach her to harness the Force or whatever you're supposed to do with it, whilst at the same time engaging in some mildly erotic Force-induced thought exchanges with the conflicted SJW Ren. Now, Poe the hothead is not going to sit idly by and accept his fate, and so he sends BB-8 Finn and Finn's future missus off to a nearby planet to find a codebreaker that can possibly get them on board the Dreadnought to disable the tracking device, adding another plot point that wasn't really necessary. On that trip, we're supposed to give a shit about some oppressed class of Oliver Twists and a maltreated species of llama-faced horses. They end up finding a codebreaker called DJ, played by Benicio del Toro, who gives the kind of weird performance only he can deliver. Meanwhile, back on Jedi Island, Rey is somewhat successful in convincing Luke to teach her, but she cuts her Jedi tutelage short when she becomes convinced that she can turn SJW Ren from the dark side. Luke cautions that he's seen this movie before and suggests Rey watch a rerun of Return of the Jedi. And while she's at it, if she watched Empire, she'd realise she's reliving Luke's trip to Dagobah. But she hasn't got a DVD player, and she's convinced that she sees good in Ren. So she willingly surrenders to the First Order, and SJW Ren brings her before Snoke. Now, this is the first time we see Snoke in the flesh. We only saw projections of him in The Force Awakens, and he looks a little bit like Ed Harris after a rough night on the piss. But he's a much snappier dresser than many of his predecessors, doing away with the monk-style robes and donning more of an Elton John shiny gold number instead. But it turns out Snoke also forgot to watch Return of the Jedi and fails to anticipate his own demise at the hands of his young apprentice. Rey and SJW then battle Snoke's personal guard together, and just when it looks like they might unite to sire a brood of future Jedi psychopaths, it's not to be. While all this is happening, the attempt to disable the tracking device is thwarted, and the Resistance flees on shuttles to a nearby planet. However, most of them get picked off on the way. The First Order follow and close in for the final kill, and just when all seems lost, Luke appears like we all knew he would, and SJW Ren decides to take him on in a one-on-one battle. As we learn, this is just a delaying tactic so that what's left of the Resistance can make an escape out the back door, led by the Crystal Snow Wolves, because of course they were. Luke then performs a self-sacrifice reminiscent of Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, a movie SJW Ren obviously forgot to watch because he falls for it. The twist here is that Luke is actually projecting himself while sitting cross-legged on Jedi Island, but this amazing feat takes its toll, and Luke keels over and disappears into the ether, whilst the handful of Resistance members take off in the Millennium Falcon after Rey levitates some rocks, which we're supposed to think is impressive, but it isn't really given what others have managed in the past. Now on to a few of the more annoying themes in this movie. The demeaning of the male action hero and the virtuous self-sacrificing, all-knowing female. Poe is called a trigger-happy flyboy and told to get his head out of his cockpit. Finn is just a hapless idiot like he was in the first film, consistently needing the guidance from the ever-so-smarter women's around him. And Luke is just a grumpy old man who wants to die in peace and take the Jedi Order down with him. The women's, on the other hand, are a different story. The sister of the stunning and brave self-sacrificing female that enabled the successful bombing of the first dreadnought turns out to be similarly stunning and brave and winds up saving Finn from his own stupidity, resulting in the most unwanted romance in film history. Leia exerts the Force in unusual ways by defying death after being blown into space, and we're introduced to Admiral Holdo, played by Laura Dern, doing her best Dame Edna impression, and she's not only wise, but sacrifices herself by destroying another of the First Order's dreadnought ships. Other notable mentions: Yoda shows up for a bonfire on Jedi Island, everyone still pretends they can understand Chewie just to humour him, and C-3PO and R2-D2 make an appearance for no other reason than nostalgia. As far as the cringe goes, director Rian Johnson obviously had a humour bypass earlier in life and serves up some truly cringeworthy moments, none worse than Poe's call with General Hux. I think I may have sniggered once, but that was at the counter when the cashier asked me if I had a points card. Of course, there were the obligatory new species of animals. I mentioned the Crystal Snow Wolves and the Llama Horse hybrids, but also on Jedi Island there were the Porgs, which I think we were supposed to find cute, but I just found almost as annoying as the Ewoks. Now, as I said, I wasn't too disappointed because my expectations were already low, but I have to commend Rian Johnson for undershooting even my low expectations. I've seen some people say that this movie is the worst in the franchise, or that this movie even ruined the franchise. But if you do think that, may I suggest you go back and watch the prequels, specifically episodes 1 and 2. One day George Lucas will be hauled in front of the Hague to explain that crime against humanity, Jar Jar Binks. Now, with all that said, I'll no doubt watch the next instalment of the Star Wars franchise. I just won't be paying to see it at the cinema. And if this review/retelling hasn't put you off handing over your hard-earned cash, then I have truly failed you, just as Obi-Wan failed Anakin and Luke failed SJW Ren. I'll see you next time.